The Assisted Human Reproduction Act came into being in 2004, and according to some, it needs revision. It's the law that makes it legal to donate sperm or eggs or even act as a surrogate to carry a child for another person who is unable to do so. But it does not allow those providing these services to be paid. There are now calls from within the Liberal Party for that to change. And the Prime Minister has said it's time to have a discussion about it, and that's what we're going to do tonight. Sarah Galashan has been looking at the state of the surrogacy in Canada and joins me now. Sarah, what are you learning?
Well, Carol, I spoke to really sort of both sides of the issue of surrogacy, and I would say that the two women I spoke to both see pros and cons to the idea of there being payment. Surrogacy, and not something that Catherine Lee ever considered, initially at least. She underwent extensive and expensive fertility treatments, and when that didn't work, she was unable, of course, to hire anyone to help her out in this situation. So she went on Facebook and she put out a very heartfelt and public plea looking for a volunteer. And I don't want to simplify what happened here, but we have some pictures to show you. And she now has a lovely 3-year-old boy as a result of all of this. I asked her, would having been able to pay a surrogate to help her have made the situation any better? And what she told me was that she really weighed it. She said that it might have, but it also, and this is important and nothing I hadn't thought of, it might have made it very unaffordable were she paying. Have a listen.
We had lawyers' fees that we obviously had to pay for. There had to be a contract involved, and there had to be legal things both before and after surrogacy. There was counseling. We had to reimburse our surrogate for her expenses, but because she wasn't actually getting a salary or getting paid, in the grand scheme of things, adoption can run you about $20,000 to $30,000, and surrogacy was about a third of that.
Okay, so what are the rules in Canada? Well, let's put them up for you. In Canada, sperm and eggs can be donated. Surrogate mothers are allowed to carry another woman's fertilized egg, but they cannot receive any compensation beyond reimbursed expenses. In other words, things like clothing, medical treatments, necessary travel. If a payment that doesn't qualify as one of those reimbursed expenses is made, it can be punished by up to 10 years in prison or a $500,000 fine. And while Lee, as you heard, said that it might have been it was financially helpful, the fact that this was a volunteer situation, she also talked a lot about the fact that there are incredible emotions that are involved in things in a surrogacy situation. And that she felt that might have been lessened if this was a subject that was talked about more often, and B, if maybe there were a more business-like contract that could have been put in place. Take a listen.
It was hard, and I'm not, I want everyone to know that. It was hard for it to happen so easily for someone else, despite the fact that it was my baby. To sort of be an outsider in the experience of my own pregnancy was a really hard thing. So I feel like if it was more of a business arrangement, more of a contract, like it might be easier for the prospective mother, but I don't know if it would be easier for the surrogate.
Well, let's talk about the surrogate. You also spoke to a woman who is willingly doing this for another family without payment.
Right, Kara Erickson, something she's always wanted to do. She's out here in BC. She has 2 healthy children of her own, and she wanted to make someone else's dreams come true. So right now she is pregnant, carrying another family's child. I asked her, is this something you would have liked to have been compensated financially for? And this is what she had to say.
I'm pretty mixed on my feelings towards the bill itself, because yes, I don't think that it should be criminalized for people to receive money, but I also don't think it would bring the right type of people to step up to donate or to be surrogates if you're getting a compensation for it.
That bill she's referring to is a private member's bill. It has yet to be introduced, so we don't know the details on it. But one thing I want to point out here about these 2 conversations with 2 women who are unrelated, don't know each other, and their stories are completely separate. They both express the fact that they have mixed feelings about the changes to this act and the fact that payment might be put in place. And they both used almost the exact same word when describing the state of surrogacy in Canada. Take a listen.
think there needs to be more regulation around it. There needs to be more clear lines as to what is okay and what is not, because it really is it's just a muck right now.
It felt like swimming through a murky swamp sometimes, because if we were sort of blazing a trail on our own that we felt like nobody had blazed before, which obviously wasn't true, but we just didn't know of anyone else who had done it.
Just quickly, if you are entering in a surrogacy situation here in Canada, there is generally a contract that is drawn up. There are agencies, can be lawyers involved, and those expenses can be negotiated. And that can generate issues. And then, of course, there's the issue of unforeseen expenses that can come up during a pregnancy. And Carol, I think that at least partly speaks to the use of the words muck and murky in both of those two interviews.
Sarah, thank you.
You bet.
All right, Justin Trudeau has called for a conversation about paying people for surrogacy, sperm or eggs. And this is in light of the fact that one of his MPs, Anthony Housefather, a Liberal MP, is planning on introducing a private member's bill. He wants to change the rules as they are now. You're not allowed to pay a surrogate. He wants to change that. Also, there's a ban on paying for sperm and eggs, and he wants to change that. Well, the Prime Minister wants to have a conversation about this. We're going to start it here on the public broadcaster. Kerry Bowman is a bioethicist at the University of Toronto, and he joins me here in Toronto. Kerry, this is a tough one, isn't it?
It really is very tough. As we just heard from the women that just spoke, this is really tough and very divisive.
Yeah, but let me play devil's advocate on the issue of women's empowerment here. If this legislation were to pass, enabling women to be paid to carry a baby for someone else, are we commodifying women's bodies? And if so, what are the implications of that?
Well, there's definitely strengths to it, but you know, maybe we are. I mean, in Canada, generally, big picture, we have not entered into the marketplace with any kind of human body part. So, you know, blood, organ donation, these types of things. We've really stood our ground in not making payment for that. Now, I realize surrogacy is not fully analogous to that, but there is some relationship to it. So, you know, nationally, we haven't done this. Having said that, things have got to change. We heard that from the women that just spoke. I've heard it from a lot of patients. It's really unfair to leave people in such a confusing, murky, convoluted system as the one we have now.
What's murky about it?
Well, you know, surrogacy can't be paid. The first thing that's murky is we don't actually know what's going on. We don't know how much surrogacy is going on, what types of surrogacy. We think gestational rather than traditional. So traditional would be a woman having a baby where it would be biologically hers, but for someone else, different father. Gestational would be having a child that she's not genetically related to. We think the latter. We don't know how many are being born in Canada, how many surrogates are being born in Canada. We don't know how often women are doing it. And now we've got a situation where foreigners are coming to Canadian women and recruiting surrogacy services. We don't know how often or what's going on there. On the front of the surrogates themselves, you know, we've got interpretations of the law, but we don't have clear regulation. The Assisted Reproductive Act of 2004 never really spelled out really clear specifics. So it creates a fearful environment for women and families that they could break the law. And most people do not want to break the law.
Yeah, yet if you were to have a bill like this, I mean, poorer couples wouldn't be able to afford to compete for a womb in the open market, presumably.
Yeah.
So what happens there?
Well, you know, and no one's really talking about this. This has not been a part of it. Who gets left behind in this? And that worries me very, very much. I would argue that the ethical equation shifts drastically. If you move from altruism to payment, the ethical equation has shifted a lot. Because altruists, to do this, you know, with only basic compensation, this is a very pure and I would say very beautiful act. When you introduce payment, it could be a blend of those two, but the ethical equation changes an awful lot when that would occur, and that would worry me a lot about that.
What would worry you specifically, Kerry?
Well, what would worry me is that, you know, people may be doing it for, you know, simply monetary purposes. We could also have women that are really trapped in impoverished situations that are really doing it not because they want to put their body on the line, but because they really well and truly need the money. Okay, and that's happened internationally. You know, India's closed down and Thailand has closed down. So now there's more pressure because other nations have closed down, and they have closed down because they feel there's exploitation of their citizens.
Yeah, so the country's poorer women would be paid, sought out to create babies for the country's more wealthy women.
Yeah, and that's a problem. Now, you know, surrogacy agencies could say, well, we could monitor that. Some of the U.S. states do. They actually interview people, and if they feel that the financial motives are, shall we say, desperate, then they'll exclude the person. There's ethical questions with that as well. But it, you know, again, in Canada, we've kind of held our ground on this, so this would be a real turning point. Now, we could easily say, and it's the truth, that people could go out into the world and find surrogacy elsewhere. And there's a whole raft of emerging bio and medical technologies that are going on in different parts of the world. But it doesn't really change the ethical equation for us. What are we going to do as a nation? But the other thing I would add is, since 2004, we're obviously in 2018, people are far more accustomed to having a third party involved in reproduction. Single people are more often having children on their own through assisted reproduction. Certainly gay couples are. So the terrain has really changed, and so the legislation needs attention.
Yeah. Someone did the calculations that if you paid a woman minimum wage for the hours that she carries the child, it totals about $107,000 for 9 months of work. That would be very enticing to people who need the money or who would want to exploit someone who needed the money.
Yeah, they could. And you know, the other ethical argument is, do we have the right to say, no, you're not allowed earning that money, right? That would be the concern. But it is very, very important that we protect citizens, and particularly women, within this. It would be nice to see it decriminalized, and you'd need a legal expert. But if there's some third way in which we can get the fear out of these types of equations without completely turning it over to market forces. But the system we have now is really, with each passing day, it's more problematic. So we cannot do nothing. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
We have to take action.
But does this fit with the feminist agenda of the Liberal government, dividing women, commodifying them based on their fertility capacity and ability to pay?
Yeah, I've heard feminist arguments on both sides of this, actually. So some would say, you know, women need the absolute freedom to make these decisions, and you can't criminalize any element like this. The others is, as you said, this is a commodification of a woman's body. So those arguments exist on both sides. But I think we should be clear here. No one's saying surrogacy is criminal. No one. Okay, we're saying the payment of surrogacy is criminal at this point. But we've got to find a way forward, because it's not fair to leave people with this much uncertainty.
Can you think of a way forward that would satisfy, to some degree, both of the concerns?
Well, I think the compensation actually should be more generous and more reasonable. You know, maternity clothes and travel expenses is one thing, but it's not uncommon for pregnant women to need time off work or out of the workplace. That would need to be, could there be tax incentives? Could there be these types of things that would occur as well? So that's all a consideration. But, you know, another factor is what's going on with international surrogacy, because remember, the international people are coming to Canadian women. So we're hearing we don't have enough surrogates in Canada, but there's also demand on Canadian women to be surrogates for women overseas. And also remember, these are Canadian women that are on complete health care. If they're in the province of Ontario, for example, it's OHIP covered. The child, Canadian born, then goes overseas. And, you know, is that a reasonable thing that we should be doing? I'm not against it per se, but could there not be some kind of compensation for that back to Canada as well?
Gosh, there's so many questions around this.
There really is.
Carrie Bowman, thank you for having this discussion with us tonight.
Happy to do so. Thank you.
Carrie is a bioethicist at the University of Toronto.